don't know me, my name is Denzel Mensah. I'm a life coach and personal development coach. I'm an ENFJ, and today I want to talk about Professor Charles Xavier from the X-Men movies, and how he is essentially the quintessential ENFJ. Now, the main movies that I'm going to be going off of are Dark Phoenix, Apocalypse, and Days of Future Past. And if we're going, technically in chronological order, then it'll actually be Days of Future Past, and then Apocalypse, and then Dark Phoenix, from the sequence of how these movies took place, in case if any of you want to go ahead and check those out. Most of my notes are going to be coming from these three X-Men movies, and it's going to be also some of my portrayals, like just the whole overall ideas of what I, as an ENFJ, was able to observe from Professor Charles Xavier, who I also believe to be ENFJ. And I love these three movies especially because you get to watch him grow, and he's still growing. Especially as a younger child, as a younger man, you don't see him like how now, when you see him in the older movies where a lot of people, I can see why they would believe that he's an INFJ, because by that point it's like when you look at Days of Future Past, actually apparently there's a 50-year gap, so that means like he was already like known as Professor Charles Xavier in Days of Future Past, and then you go 50 years into the future, so that was like 1973 apparently, all the way to 2024, if I remember correctly. And you even see in that movie there's like a little bit of a parallel where, young Charles Xavier and future Charles Xavier are speaking to each other. And from there you get to see, like, once again, even older future Charles Xavier, before he sends Logan into the past, he says, "I was a very different man back then." And for me, when it comes to typing people, both in real life and even in fiction, even though in fiction, no, like they're not like real people and stuff like that, so I understand that there's a caveat over there. I think that if you're looking for the best fit type for anyone, a very crucial thing to do is to also look at their younger years. There's a lot of people who may appear introverted right now, but when you look at their younger years, then you see that they're actually, they were probably like extroverts, and they just kind of developed that secondary function. Sometimes you'll see a whole bunch of like introverts who learn to now become more outgoing. Like when they were younger, then they were actually more, as an introvert, and then now they develop that auxiliary function. So it's really good to like look at both their younger years and where they are right now, because we're always growing, we're always developing. And I think that Professor Charles Xavier is a great example of that. I believe that the writers actually did intend for him to be an ENFJ in a way, especially since he was based off of Martin Luther King Jr., who I also believe was an ENFJ. And then Magneto, who I personally believe is an ENTJ, although many would probably say INTJ. He was also based off of Malcolm X. And so I believe that, looking at this Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X kind of polarity also brings the same kind of, idea for Professor Charles Xavier and Magneto, and the kind of conflict that they go through within the movie. And then you see an actual INFJ in the movie, Jean Grey, who I believe, we get to watch her go through a lot of her NITI looping and learning how to, FE, to be honest, and even having like what I would call, symbolically, that introverted intuition, the dominant function of an INFJ and the auxiliary function of an ENFJ. You see that her introverted intuition is honestly more powerful than Professor Xavier's, it being a dominant function, but it's also so powerful that it doesn't even really have control. Like, it's just all over. And so Professor Xavier helps her, with his auxiliary introverted intuition, to be able to kind of like calm it down and direct it, because it's that judging function of FE, extroverted feeling, that, when it comes to the theory of introvert intuition, or like, just in typology, you must use, if you're an NJ, then you're either using extroverted thinking or extroverted feeling. And so if you're an INJ, so if you're an INTJ, then in order to be able to really direct your introverted intuition, you have to develop extroverted thinking. And then if you're an INFJ, in order to really direct your introverted intuition, you have to develop extroverted feeling, or else that NI is just going to be exploding all over the place kind of thing. So that's what really like helps it, get narrowed down and go into the right areas. And I feel like that's what Professor Charles Xavier does a lot, not only with Jean Grey, who I believe is an INFJ, and they have such a beautiful dynamic despite a lot of the things that we're going to be sharing in this video, but even with his students. The fact that Professor Xavier has created a whole entire school academically to teach the mutants how to be their best selves. I find that, first of all, like for me as a life coach and as an ENFJ as well, I found that to be really, really, again, like just super ENFJ. As an ENFJ and as a life coach, I'm someone who enjoys being able to see the best in people and those who want to become a better version of themselves. I love to help them tap into that. And so especially using tools like the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs, it's like, okay, just like the mutants, our cognitive functions are our superpowers. And for me as a coach, just like Professor Xavier, I'm here to help you learn how to use your cognitive functions to their highest ability. So even though you might have talent with your dominant function and even your auxiliary function, you might not have skill. And so you're probably using it at a, basic level. There's several different other people of the same type as you who are using their that same cognitive function at the same level. They might be using it differently than you are, which is again what makes them an individual, but at the end of the day, it's still the core concept of that function. But now when you heighten it, now when you really come down to understand what that function is and you become aware of what exactly you're doing and how it's different from people who aren't using that function, now you're like, wait a minute, this is a tool, this is a superpower. I want to be able to expand it. I want to be able to use this function in a way where I often say that Magneto at one point, he was just, picking up like nickels and, maybe even like a computer or something. And then you look at Days of Future Past and all of a sudden he's picking up a whole football stadium. I believe that Professor Charles Xavier is the one who helped them tap into that power to be able to use his power to the utmost, and to the strongest. And so I think that that's one thing that ENFJs really excel at, and I think that that's something that Professor Xavier is good at. And then on top of that, having TI as an inferior function, anybody can still see that, he has a very well developed TI. And the thing is, when it comes to our inferior TI as an ENFJ or even an ESFJ, this is where you build a lot of expertise. This is where you build a lot of like academics, and so pretty essentially, somebody, an EFJ who has very well developed TI, they become an expert, a teacher, or a professional in about maybe like 1 to probably 3 max areas in life, and they kind of like stick to that. And they just learn everything that they possibly can about it. They break it apart. They get all the different nuances and crooks and crannies and everything there, and they say like, okay, this is my field of study. This is where I've actually become an expert and good at, and now that I've become this, I want to teach it because it's my aspiration function. So I want to teach people how to use this, or I want to teach people about this. This is the one thing, or there's 2 or 3 things that I'm very confident in. Everything else, I honestly am not really too confident in. But for this stuff, for these 3 things max possibly in my arsenal, I am so confident and I'm so good at it because I really took the time to study all my stuff, and I'm still continuing to study all of my stuff. And as I use it to teach people, my ultimate goal is to go right back up to that dominant function of extroverted feeling which is all about getting people's needs met and structuring society. And I believe that in teaching these concepts and teaching these academic things or whatever that I've become a professional at, I'm benefiting society. I'm doing my part to help us have an overall better society by helping the people that make up the fabric of society. And so you can see how FETI really works well over there. And I believe that Professor Xavier, although he has his school, his main goal is the dominant FE function of trying to not only help to even essentially help the kids to become the best versions of themselves and hone in on their mutant powers, but to overall bring harmony and peace around the world for the humans in the world to be able to accept the mutants. But even though, like every type, even though Professor Xavier has all of these great and beautiful parts that I pretty much just went on for like about 10 minutes about, he definitely also has his downfalls. And we are going to be talking about that a lot as well throughout this video because honestly, as I was watching these three movies, I saw a lot of the beauty in Professor Xavier, but I also saw a lot of ugly parts. And those ugly parts allowed me to be able to further reflect upon myself and be like, wow, I can actually see how parts of these things happened either in past chapters of my life or even some of them still are there's still like traces of it in my life right now. And I can see how, even though Professor Xavier meant well, just like I might mean well, sometimes your intentions are not always what makes things best. And so it's better to just face the music, own up to things, and try to do better. And I'm definitely just going to talk about a lot of that throughout this video. So let's get in. Okay, so we are going to actually go a little bit backwards, and we're going to start with Dark Phoenix. So in this movie, one of the biggest things that stood out to me immediately was Professor Xavier engaging with Jean Grey. Now, throughout all three of these movies, you see that once again, they have a pretty great dynamic as ENFJs and INFJs usually have. There is some toxicity in the dynamic, and I usually hate that word because I feel like it's overly used, like, oh, this person's toxic, that person's toxic. But you'll see a lot of that throughout this movie, and a lot of NFJ manipulation and controlling, and even gaslighting, a lot of gaslighting. But it's not intended in the way that it's supposed to be. But as I was saying, when you go into Dark Phoenix, you see that Jean Grey, after she pretty much, unfortunately, killed her parents in a car accident, she's now brought to Professor Xavier, and she's very sad and annoyed with her mutant powers because of what she did to her family. And as she's speaking to Professor Xavier uses the analogy of a pen, saying that, okay, take this pen as a gift. You can use it for good, or you can pretty much use it to poke someone in the eye or something along those lines. But at the end of the day, it's still a gift. However you decide to use it is up to you.
Do you know what? Take this pen, right? It's something that, well, actually, just take it. It's a gift. Now, you could choose to draw a really good picture with that, or you could use it to poke someone's eyes out. But either way, it's still just a pen. It's just a gift. And what you choose to do with your gift, it's entirely up to you. But if you want to use it to do good stuff, then I can help.
I don't like the other doctors.
No. And you're not like the other patients.
And that, in my opinion, was Professor Xavier, really showing, again, the beauty of not only just having like a mutant power, but like looking at ourselves. Some of us, we are blessed. Again, cognitive functions is the biggest thing, in my opinion. We are blessed with certain gifts. A lot of people can look at their FE and be like, oh, why am I always paying attention to what people think and, relationships and this is that. And some gifts can actually look like a curse. But what are you going to do with that gift? I think that's what really will make the difference. And so when you look at, the gift that you've been given, and you try to find ways to be able to cultivate it and to use it in a skillful manner, kind of like the pen. I believe that that's where you really begin to hone in on the gift and use it to its best ability. In this movie, you'll also see that Professor Xavier is pretty much one of the only people that refuses to leave anyone behind. So when it became, that when it was in that scene where there's like rocket ship or something that they're in, then essentially what happened was that they're all in this rocket ship or something, and I don't really recall who exactly it was, but they were about to like retreat and head back, but they realized that somebody was missing, and Professor Xavier specifically told Mystique, who I believe was an ISTJ, he's like, hey, no one's getting left behind, which again, in my opinion, seems like a very like NFJ thing to do. I think that TE is more comfortable, not in a sick way, but more like, hey, look, there's gonna like the collateral damage is just something that we have to accept, but it's the hard decision, but we have to do this. But Professor Xavier also makes the hard decision. He's like, look, no one's getting left behind. I believe in Jean. I think that she can do this. We should send her out to go and do this kind of thing. And so he sends out Jean, and then pretty much chaos kind of like breaks out. Like they do end up succeeding in the mission, but she ends up getting like, I think, pretty badly hurt. And Raven comes back, and she's talking to Professor Xavier, and she's all like, oh, come on now, like, I hope that this is all just like not to like stroke your ego kind of thing. Whereas Professor Xavier says like, okay, all of what we're doing as the X-Men is a means to an end, which in my opinion is very indicative of an EJ. Like EJs tend to see things like the ends justifies the means, especially having, two perceiving functions in the middle of their polarities. So the NISE or sometimes like SINE, they see like, okay, this is a lot of what's going on, but I have already in my mind what I really want to happen, and sometimes this is just what we have to get through in order to make it happen. But Mystique was like, yeah, okay, well, I feel like, it's just something to kind of like stroke your ego. Whereas like for him, he said it's a small price to pay to keep the peace, them doing all of what they're doing throughout the movie. Mystique also goes on to talk about how Professor Xavier, once again, is stroking his ego, saying like to one of the X-Men, I believe it was Magneto, or it was actually Hank. She's like, yeah, well, what do you think that the X in X-Men stands for? And she's essentially insinuating that Professor Xavier has started a cult or created an occult. And I think that, once again, it's not a good thing, but it goes back to that whole ENFJ cult leader trope that has come from like many cult leaders, the good ones such as Oprah Winfrey, who low-key has a cult, and even Elliot Hulse here on YouTube, low-key has a cult, which is pretty much like this big following of people who will literally do like almost anything that you tell them to do, especially if you're like teaching things in a very spiritual way, versus the late Jim Jones, who was the cult leader of Jonestown and caused a lot of people to die from drinking genocidal or poisonous Kool-Aid, who unfortunately was also in the ENFJ. So I think that, again, although it's not necessarily a good reason, it's just another reason as to why I believe that, this further goes on to show like how like Professor Xavier just might have been an ENFJ, and other things such as like how he loves the limelight, and at one point Charles actually claimed to have overly done FE to save Jean. He talks about scaffolding the walls of her mind to protect her from her trauma and her memories. And once again, ISTJ Mystique, who's the exact opposite of Professor Xavier, which, by the way, if you ever want to find out what type is your opposite type, there's a theory where you change the first three dichotomies, like the E versus I, S versus N, F versus T, and you keep that last one. And so Professor Xavier, if he's an ENFJ, then his opposite type would be ISTJ. Now, people might think that, like, oh no, the opposite is actually like you change the last one. I believe that's more of the reverse type. So I think that Professor Xavier's reverse type is ISTP, which is, the reason why it's reverse is because it's the same exact function. So it's not necessarily opposite. It's the same functions, just in reverse. And coincidentally, his hardest student was Logan Wolverine, who I believe was ISTP. But when it comes to the opposite type, I believe that it's those first three, and keep that last one, because these types do not share any common functions, and they really are coming from an opposite view of the world. And these types actually tend to have some of the most conflict with each other. So I think that's an interesting thing to look at from that point. When Professor Charles Xavier talks about all the scaffolding that he did to protect Jean and everything like that, I remember that Mystique said something along the lines of, oh, okay, there's another word for what you did. In Professor Xavier's mind, he saw it as okay, he was just constantly just trying to, again, protect her from herself, So he's like, oh, let me block out this memory. Let me block out that memory. Let me make you think this and let me make you think that. But Mystique saw that as manipulation. She saw that as gaslighting, and she just saw that as overly controlling. Even though he meant best for that, he wasn't doing this. He wasn't manipulating her in a sense that where it's he was actually trying to control her and make her do some dastardly things. He was actually doing it because he really believed that that was probably what was best for her, to keep her from engaging and having some certain types of pain. But just because, again, you might have the best of intentions doesn't mean that it's always the right thing to do. Professor Xavier also constantly protected Jean with lies. He would tell her things like, you're just hearing things, you need rest. And it was just this constant gaslighting. Essentially, just throughout all of these movies, you see that he's constantly saying oh, Jean, don't worry about it. Yeah, your mind is so powerful, but it's nothing. And she's like, yo, no, I know what I saw. So he was constantly pretty much FETI, protecting Jean from the truth. He thought it was best for her and had the best intentions, but it actually damaged her. And so something that you'll see a lot with high FE users and then low TI users is that they know the TI truth of a situation, but because they know how knowing that truth might affect the harmony of somebody's inner mind or the outer or the external world, then they might hide that truth from the people, and they might just deal with that on their own because they don't want everybody to be alarmed, or they don't even want you, whose truth it's supposed to be alarmed. You see this a lot with Raymond Reddington from The Blacklist, where once again it's another ENFJ ISTJ dynamic between Raymond Reddington, who's the ENFJ, and then Elizabeth Keene, who's the ISTJ. And she's constantly trying to figure out the truth behind a lot of various situations having to do with her own identity and Raymond Reddington's identity throughout the series. And Raymond Reddington is just notorious for withholding truth from not only from Elizabeth Keene, but also the task force, because he knows how they're going to probably use the information. And for Elizabeth Keene, he also knows how much is going to hurt her. And there's been a lot of truths that he did allow her to finally find out, or she just found out on her own, and she was hurt from it. But she constantly still sought to find out more and more truths. And it seems like this strong thing that ENFJs have to eventually learn, that a lot of people, they want. They might not know how much pain that the truth will bring them, but they want to still know the truth of situations, and they still want to go through that pain. Honestly, and I could be biased, but my personal opinion, there are just certain truths that the pain is not necessarily worth it, And honestly, that information is just also unnecessary. It'll just bring unnecessary pain, and to an extent, not in all cases, but to an extent, ignorance is kind of bliss. I would even trust certain people with sharing certain information with me. Like, I think that there's an acronym where it's like, okay, before you share a certain truth, you should think. Like, and honestly, I don't really remember what the acronym was, but I'm probably listing it over there. Like, you should like look. Is it helpful? Is it necessary? Something like that. But pretty much, this is what Professor Xavier did a lot. He hid the truth from everyone, and then he pretty much ends up going into this FESE loop, where he's not really like thinking long term about a lot of the things that are going on with the X-Men, and like how things are like going to spiral out into the future. Instead, he's just kind of like about the fame, and he's just like about keeping the peace, and just continuing to like move on, and like keep the school running. But he's not really like just honing in and thinking too much about like, okay, where's everything going, until people really start piling onto him. And in this movie, they do it quite hard. Like, everybody's just looking at him and telling him like, yo, you done messed up, Xavier. And he's even having a hard time looking at that himself and being able to accept it.
Hi. This is your fault, Charles. It's your fault she's dead. Come on, that's not fair. Fair? I'm not talking about fair. You messed with the mind of an 8-year-old girl. You pushed down all that pain and anger. Where do you think it's gonna go?
I did that to help her. What I do
Oh,
to
please,
help
come
all
on,
of
please.
that.
You still can't see what you did wrong? It's just... No, you need to face this, Charles. You need to face it. Come on, admit it to me right now. Come on, admit it. Charles, just admit you were wrong, please. It's okay. I really hope you feel better, Hank. I hope that railing on me 5 minutes after I put my foster sister in the grave has made you feel like that. This isn't about me. You know what? I know what I did wrong, okay, Charles? She was gonna leave. Raven was gonna leave, and I talked her out of it. She saw what the rest of us didn't. What was that? This whole time, we've been trying to protect these kids from the world, when really we should have been protecting them from you.
But it's interesting how even throughout this whole entire movie, even when Hank and Magneto and many others were actually trying to kill Jean Grey after she killed Mystique, Professor Xavier was the only one who seemed willing to still to protect Jean. Granted, it could have been his fault, but he was still the one to be able to be like, no, I have hope for her. I know that this isn't really her, and I want to continue to believe in her. And that seems to be a trope, not only just throughout all 3 movies that are being woven into, but also for ENFJs in general. Having hope and having faith in people. That's kind of like what it's one of the many superpowers that we bring into the world. Like, once we have faith and we have hope in certain people, then it changes them. When you look at General Iroh from the Avatar: The Last Airbender series, who I also believe was an ENFJ and an Enneagram 9 at that, you see how he looks at Zuko, who I personally believe was an ISFP, and he is looking at Zuko and he's like, hey, like, I know that you're dealing with this yin-yang energy inside you and everything, but I believe that I've taught you well. I believe that I've taught you to, like, to hone in on who you are as a person and to grow and all of this. And now, like, essentially we're seeing that, not to spoil it, but Zuko, he does become a better person, like General Iroh was right. And the biggest thing about ENFJs, which is, again, like, you have to like see, like, you get to see this trope throughout the 3 movies, is that once they have hope in you, once they have that faith in you, and they continue to like help guide you in that sense, then that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, that because they had the hope in you and because they believed in you, then a lot of times you end up becoming what they believed you to be, which is, in most situations, if the ENFJ has good intentions and everything, your best version, your best self, because everybody needs somebody to believe in them, to have faith in them. And this is what Professor Xavier constantly did with Jean Grey and many of his students. And then that's even what Iroh did with Zuko, to the point where he was able to change. This is where Professor Xavier did with Magneto, and even with Mystique. And it took a long time, but it ended up working. Now, was it able to work on the grand scheme of things? That's the philosophical tug between, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, which again goes down to Professor Xavier and Magneto, and we're going to be talking about that in the end of Apocalypse. But yeah, that is a big thing that Professor Xavier seemed to have. He was always willing to protect Jean, and there's even a point where Professor Xavier sees Magneto outside where they're trying to attack Jean, and he apologizes to Magneto, and Magneto says, "You're always sorry, Charles, and you always have a speech to follow," which at that point he does end up giving a little speech, and even Magneto's like, "See, I told you so." And I think that once again is an ENFJ thing. We just kind of go on these speeches of inspiration, or trying to get people to think about the future and to do the right thing. And at this point, Professor Xavier was trying to get Magneto to look, I know that you're TE, for example, because Magneto has his own problems, where he's going into TESE, and everyone is still using, even when Professor Xavier is looping, he's still using a little bit of his introverted intuition to think of the future. You don't just completely black out from your auxiliary function. Magneto's still using his introverted intuition to think about the future. He's not completely blacked out, but his future pacing is limited. So he's thinking a little bit TE is we just have to kill Mystique, and that'll stop this problem. We just have to kill Jean, and then this is going to stop this problem. We just have to kill the people, eradicate the human race over here, and it'll just stop this problem, kind of thing. Because his NI is trying to think ahead, is look, the long-term solution is going to be solved if we really eradicate the problem here. But then Professor Xavier is no, because if we do this, there's just a better path, which is, the FE path. There's a better path. We can do this. We can be better. We can show them who we really are. We're not bad people. Maybe then we'll be able to have harmony. We can change their mind, which is that introvert intuition flavoring still coming in. We can change their perspectives and their perception of us. And once we do that, then it'll help them to be able to become our allies and not necessarily our enemies. And so this is a big thing and a big tug of war that Professor Xavier and Magneto often go throughout all the movies, especially even as Professor Xavier is constantly trying to get everybody to kind of FE and to blend in so that they can kind of keep the peace, and just kind of be affable, how Martin Luther King Jr. did, and just be peaceful despite being attacked and everything like that. Then Mystique and Magneto, they constantly say, as TE users, they're pretty much look, we tried your way, Charles. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. And it's a constant back and forth, because honestly, FE doesn't always work. It takes a lot of time, and sometimes there's just people who are not going to be influenced by that. So that's why we had to have a Malcolm X as well, because he was able to accomplish a lot of things that Martin Luther King Jr. was just not going to be able to accomplish. And at the end of the day, you find out that you need both. There's a time to where you should be more affable and diplomatic and have that better path, and being kind and everything. But then there's also time where you have to retaliate. You have to assert your boundaries. You have to be able to show that, look, we are not punks. We are not this. We are not going to be tallied with. We don't want any trouble, but we will bring that trouble. And at the end of Apocalypse, that's when Magneto actually asked Professor Xavier. He's like, so, what are you going to do? Don't you ever worry about what's going to happen? When people actually start to come over to your school, and everything, and try to like wreak havoc, when these humans actually try to like kill you and everything like that, like it's human nature that people are going to be, messed up in this sense. And then Professor Xavier is like, I pretty much pity the fool who comes over to my school, comes to my squad, my group, my children, the people that I am shepherding as this ENFJ, my cult, whatever you want to call it, looking for trouble. And by that point, you see that he's now adopted some of Mystique's and Magneto's TE philosophy on retaliating and fighting back. And that's when he's assembled the X-Men so that they can actually, retaliate and fight back when it comes to not only protecting the human race, but if the human race were to try to protect them with, sentinels in the future, anything that it might be, that they're now ready to be able to also protect themselves. So he kind of like, learns that, okay, I'm still going to hold on to my FE values, but there is definitely some TE values there. And then you see pretty much that Mystique and Magneto also kind of do the same thing, where it's like, I still believe that we need to retaliate, but I guess that Professor Xavier is right too. Like, we do have to think about how we're coming off towards these people and try to take peace as the higher ground, because there's just been enough killing, and we do not need to have a worldwide war all the time. So at the end of Dark Phoenix, he essentially admits that he's wrong, finally, after, being berated throughout the whole entire movie. Like, even Hank at one point saying like, yo, just admit that you were wrong. Just admit it. And he refused to admit that because either he still believed that he was right, or he was just, too shameful to admit that he was wrong. And he just, again, couldn't really like see it at that point, and even gaslit Hank at that point, like, I hope that you feel better, after you came berating me, after my best friend died and everything like that. But at the end of this movie, he did actually admit, like, I was wrong, and he gives this encouraging speech to everyone to be able to work together so they can still protect and save Jean. And that's essentially how the movie ends. I believe that was the last X-Men movie that we've seen created, and that movie was once again like where Charles Xavier was really just put on in the spotlight and to the test, and the movie seemed to like center around him, even though it was about Jean. But in that movie, you really get to see the worst parts of Charles and how he, as a young ENFJ, continues to grow and mature and develop into the now great and wise ENFJ that we now see him as, in the movies where he is older and he has actually guided the X-Men. Now we move on to Days of Future Past, and like I said before, there was a point where he's pretty much sending Logan into the past to talk to his younger self, and he distinctly tells Logan like, hey, you're gonna have to be patient with me. I was a very different man back then. That was like 50 years ago. And when Logan meets Professor Xavier in the past, then Professor Xavier at that point he has his hair, he's able to walk, and all of that. And the reason why he's walking at that point is because he's been taking and injecting this medicine of some sort, or this substance that dilutes all of his NI, or introvert intuition, or his telekinesis, his powers, essentially, like his telepath powers, so that he can continue to just remain, like, he's just in a very bad and dark place, like, and he is seeing his introvert intuition as nothing but like just pain. So he just kind of like sticks in this like kind of almost FESC, and even like this very strong like TI point, like, I just don't give a crap about anybody, but at the same time, like, I'm just kind of like, doing things. I'm not really like, thinking about the future. I'm just stuck. I'm just kind of like stuck. And there's even a point where finally, like, Logan, who again is his reverse type, ISTP, is talking to him, and right before he's about to inject himself one more time, then Logan, Wolverine, is like, look, like, we really need your help. Like, we're gonna need you to be able to suffer through this pain and keep these powers of yours so that you can help us, so that you can assemble us. And one of the complaints that Professor Xavier gives is, as these go, my legs, then this comes back. They always come back. Like all of the voices that he starts to hear in his head, like pretty much he's talking about his telepath powers, and that's what I would then, associate with his introverted intuition. So it's almost as if like he is really trying to avoid his introverted intuition, because even though it's power and he taps him into like his strongest power, that comes with a lot of responsibility and that comes with a lot of pain, and he doesn't want to be able to feel the pain of everybody else in the world and everything like that. So he becomes a little bit afraid of that. So in this movie, there's a point where, once again, young Professor Xavier is able to communicate with older, more matured Professor Xavier. And as he's speaking to him, he says something along the lines of, "I open my mind and all of it overwhelms me." But then older Professor Xavier tells him, "Bear their pain without breaking. Charles, we need you to hope again." And so future Xavier to younger Xavier pretty much like helps him to have hope in his people again. And then Xavier promises Logan that he will do his best, around after that point, to find the X-Men and to guide them and to lead them and assemble them. Now this can be seen as forceful FE, but in actuality, it also is the very thing that brings harmony in the future we see as people and as a society. So at that point, like what we're really seeing is Professor Xavier like beginning to have hope, beginning to believe in people again, and beginning to tap back into his introverted intuition. The future Xavier, starts to tell him like, just because somebody has pretty much like lost their way does not mean that they've lost their way forever, and this really helps him. Like, at first, future Xavier is talking to younger Xavier because he's saying like, whoa, look, like younger Xavier is like, wow, I become you? Like, you actually believe this? Like, you're so much older and so much wiser. So if the older version of myself turned out to be this awesome, then you know what? I'm going to allow me to do my part to become that older version of myself. And man, wouldn't that be awesome to be able to just see like how amazing we've turned out in the future, to then allow us to be encouraged to continue to work to become the best version of ourselves so that we can actually manifest and see that future. And so I thought that was a pretty dope scene. And throughout that movie, just from hearing that, he's able to also use that philosophy on Raven, where he pretty much is like, I've been trying to control you since the day we met. Which, again, also to me really seems very ENFJ. But everything that happens now is in your hands. I have faith in you, Raven. At this point, you see that Charles is learning to let go of controlling people and trusting that they can make their own decisions, and he has taught them well. And this is something that every ENFJ must learn, which is to have hope for people, to have faith in them. Just like I was saying earlier in this video, ENFJs having faith and hope in people is exactly what's going to cultivate that soil for that seed that you're planting in people to be able to grow and help them become their best versions of themselves. Having that hope and that faith is that watering, that sunlight and that soil that's helping that photosynthesis to help that plant just grow. And if you are lacking that hope, if you're lacking that faith, then how are they going to be able to manifest that? A lot of people, honestly, they don't really have that much hope and that faith, and that much faith in themselves. Unfortunately, we should, but that's just honestly not really the case. And so they need somebody to have that hope and that faith and to believe in them first. And then they're able to now get off of those training wheels and then also believe in themselves. And I believe that is what Professor Charles Xavier brought to the world, and that's what most ENFJs bring into the world.
The first step in understanding one's power is learning the extent of it. Only then can we begin the process of teaching you how to control it. If you do decide to stay, I can promise you that by the time you're done here, you'll be able to go back into the world and play a stable and productive part in it.
You as an ENFJ teach people and you have faith and hope in them in that sense, then now you can trust that, you know what, I've done well enough to be able to teach you the right way to do something. So now you are going to like move on in the way that you are, and I'm going to just trust that you will make the right decisions. And even when you mess up, you'll know how to like fix things. Like one of the biggest things that kind of like wrapped up for me was that Professor Xavier says at the end, countless choices define our fate. Each choice, each moment, a ripple in the river of time. Enough ripples and you change the tide. For the future is never truly set. And I believe that was just a magnificent point of the story, because essentially earlier in the movie, Professor Xavier had told Hank that, you know, Hank had mentioned that there's this like, you know, thing in quantum physics where even if you're trying to avoid something happening, it's almost like destiny is just always going to happen the way that it's going to happen. It's just going to find a different route. And that's where Professor Xavier used future Professor Xavier's philosophy and quote, and pretty much said that, no, I don't believe in that theory. I do believe that we can change the trajectory of somebody's life. So even if Mystique, even if Raven is destined to do this action, I do believe that we can influence it, because fate is not really set in stone. We're not really coming down to this sort of like fatalism. We have countless choices, and these countless choices define our fate. And each choice, each moment, is a ripple in the river of time. Enough ripples and you change the tide. For the future is never truly set.
Now, there's a theory in quantum physics that time is immutable. It's like a river. You can throw a pebble into it, create a ripple, but the current always corrects itself. No matter what you do, the river just keeps flowing in the same direction.
What are you trying to say?
What I'm saying is, what if the war is inevitable? What if she's meant to kill Trask? What if this is just simply who she is?
Just because someone stumbles, loses their way, doesn't mean they're lost forever. No, I don't believe that theory, Hank. And I cannot believe that that is who she is.
Beautiful. And if every ENFJ could just hone in on that and be able to apply that to themselves with all of the decisions that they're making, and then also help other people in guiding them and then trusting them to be able to make their own decisions after a while of like coaching or mentoring or, you know, teaching and all of that, and just letting them do them, man, so many beautiful things can happen, and our world will just be an overall better place. And last but not least, apocalypse. Now, as I said earlier, Professor Charles Xavier gaslights very frequently, and unfortunately, let me make this clear. This is not just an ENFJ thing. Just because you know somebody that gaslights does not mean that they're an ENFJ. However, ENFJs are prone to doing this a lot. It is a form of manipulation, just calling it how it is. Now, is manipulation always bad? Not really. Not in my opinion. However, is gaslighting always bad? Probably. But does gaslighting always come from a bad intention? No, I do not believe so. I believe that we see the nuance of this very, very fine ethical line here, where Professor Xavier is constantly gaslighting Jean Grey. But again, it's hard for me to personally believe that he had ill intention toward Jean. If anything, it seemed like he was gaslighting her to, again, protect her in a way that he thought was best for her. But in actuality, it kind of just made things worse. So the movie kind of like starts off with Xavier gaslighting Jean after comforting the children and trying to comfort Jean with his own understanding of his NI power. You know, he's telling the children all pretty much like, go back into their rooms, everything is fine, don't worry about it. And he's doing the FE thing, like, hey, everybody calm down, let's keep the harmony, let's be all right. But again, he goes down to the TI, like, okay, I know that this is not the truth of the situation, but I just want to make sure that the tribe is okay and they're not fretting about it, because I don't want to worry about the tribe. I have this TI situation that I have to solve. And so the tribe is just going to get in the way of that, So I have to make sure they're okay, and that's why I'm telling them that everything's going to be okay, because it is, if I'm able to do this properly. And so he goes in, then he's talking to Jean, and he's pretty much just like telling her like, oh, Jean, you're just having a bad dream, and this is that, and he's relating to her. But then you see that Jean is kind of like upset already with like you don't understand like how it is to feel this way, whereas like he's like, no, actually it wasn't just long ago that I've dealt with this very same thing before, so I do understand, I do get it, but it's still just kind of like tough. And then he tries to go and solve the situation himself, but again, things kind of take a turn in this movie.
Let any of the children come this way.
I saw the end of the world. I could feel all this death.
It was just a dream.
It felt real.
I know. Your mind is the most powerful I've ever seen. It can convince itself.
No, it's not just the mind reading or the telekinesis. It's something else. Some dark power inside, and it's growing like a fire. I thought I was getting better.
You are. You will. You just have to be patient.
No, you don't know what it's like to be afraid to shut your eyes, to be trapped inside your own head.
Oh, I think I do. It wasn't so long ago that I was plagued by voices myself. All their suffering, their pain, their secrets. Everyone fears that which they do not understand. You will learn to control your powers, and when you do, you'll have nothing to fear.
Later on, you see that someone comes onto the grid. Her name was Moira MacTarget. And apparently this was Professor Xavier's kind of like crush, or just overall love interest, romantic interest in the previous X-Men movies that have not been mentioned or referenced in this video so far, because it's already as long as it is, just from these 3 movies. But if you go back and watch, you will see her, and you'll see also why he wiped her mind, because once again, he did what he thought was best for her. And this seems to be a very strong FE thing, especially FE Dom, and especially FE NI. Because FE NI is a lot of the times like, okay, I'm thinking far into the future. You don't see what I'm seeing up ahead. So I'm trying to protect you. But a lot of times, people don't want to be protected. They have to see, if anything, what they're being protected from. Because if they don't always see what they're being protected from, you can tell them what they're being protected from. But if they don't see it for themselves, they're going to think that you're manipulating them, which in a lot of cases you honestly are, even if it's with good intention. And they're going to think that you also do not trust them to be able to protect themselves or to go through things on themselves. And the more that you're trying to protect people a lot of times, the more that you're kind of like somebody might just need crutches and you give them a whole wheelchair. You're not really allowing them to be able to actually grow. And that's the thing. As an ENFJ, you want to help people to be able to grow so they can eventually take care of themselves. You don't want them to be codependent on you. Or some of y'all might actually want people to be codependent on you, but that is not a healthy trait. Raymond Reddington, he loves people being codependent on him. But the truth of the matter is, he has to allow them to be able to set off and just be on their own, especially with Elizabeth Keene. He has to allow her to be able to just do whatever she does without him always having to be her guardian angel. And in the same sense, Professor Charles Xavier needs to eventually learn how to do the same thing. But in this case, he, wiped Moira's memories, just kind of like what he did with Jean Grey's memories. And he's inquired about it, and he says that he did what he thought was best for her, and paradoxically, not what was best for himself, because he believed his feelings didn't matter in the situation. And the reason why I say paradoxically is because even though he didn't necessarily consider his own feelings and it was hurting him, he still also in a way considered his feelings. It wasn't what he wanted to do, So a lot of people often say that every decision that we make is kind of inherently like selfish. And I feel like this is one of those situations where it's not really that black and white, because this wasn't really like a selfish act, at least in my opinion. Y'all can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. That Professor Xavier did to wipe Moira's memories. He was actually trying to protect her from, again, herself. And it ended up hurting him too, because she didn't remember him. He wished that he was able to have those interactions with her and everything again. But he couldn't. He thought he again made a sacrifice. And so he wasn't being selfish, at least in my opinion. He was trying to be selfless and do what he thought, again, was best for her. But making those decisions for other people is not always a smart move. It's not always a smart move. And thankfully, by the end of the movie, Charles returns Moira's memories and says he should have never taken them. This is an ENFJ lesson, because Charles then accepts the idea also of creating the X-Men for retaliation and protection, both for humans and mutants, kind of like what I said. But the ENFJ lesson in this with Moira is to essentially, once again, allow people to learn, to grow, to mature, and then go off and be on their own. They cannot be tethered to you forever, and you cannot be always making decisions for them. You can't always preemptively decide, I know what's best for you. A lot of times, especially as ENFJs, a lot of people who are going to be watching this video are probably going to disagree with what I'm about to say right now, but the truth is, I'm biased, sure. I do believe that ENFJs very frequently know what is best for people, but they destroy or taint that when they decide what is best for people a lot of times. So what you're thinking could actually be best for that person, but the thing is, that person has to make that decision on their own. That's what would make it best for them. If the person ends up not being able to make that decision, then I guess that's just something that we have to we have to deal with, and we have to just make sure that we help them again, we guide them. We are there for them as we continue to learn their lessons, as they continue to learn their lessons. But you cannot make the decisions for those people. It's just not right. And that is something that Professor Charles Xavier definitely had to take in and to learn throughout the whole movie. Now, this was also something that Jean, even as an INFJ, was learning a little bit too. And for her thing was about, getting a handle on her NI through her usage of FE. And that was like, oh, I have to use my NI to pretty much protect my people. So there's even one point where in Dark Phoenix where Jean says to Professor Xavier, after having been mad at her for a long time, and Professor Xavier finally allows her to be able to see what actually happened in the past, then she pretty much says, I know that you did what you did out of love, and I forgive you. I know what I need to do now. I need to protect my family. And that's kind of like Jean tapping into her FE. And then that automatically helped her to be able to utilize her NI in a very powerful way, because now she had direction for her NI. And this also happens at the end of Apocalypse. You know, the whole movie pretty much like ends with Jean just blasting off her NI and for the protection of her family, which again is that FE development, having that direction. So Professor Xavier, all he's ever trying to do is to protect the family, and then he uses his NI to pretty much like supplement that. And so he's in the NI realm at one point with Apocalypse. You know, I'm blanking. The antagonist of the movie so far. And they're in the NI realm and they're duking it out and they're fighting and all of that. But at one point, he is cornered and he is pretty much in need of help. And this is where he allows Jean to be able to come into the picture, to be able to join in that NI realm. There's always this speech and this language of, thanks for letting me in, thanks for letting me in, that they say throughout the movie. And it seems like they're in this astral world where it seems like Apocalypse, who's an INTJ, and then again Professor Charles Xavier, who's in my opinion an ENFJ, and then even Jean, who's an INFJ, they all three enter at one point, and that's where the battle really happens. And from there, that's where it manifests into the physical realm, so into the SE realm, because everything that kind of like starts off in the physical starts off in the spiritual. At least that's something that I believe, and I believe that this movie kind of portrayed that. Or if anything, it starts off in the mental. So they were in that NI mental realm, and they were able to defeat Apocalypse there, and then that was able to manifest in the external realm, where Jean finally just finished everything off with the blow after Professor Xavier told her to unleash her NI powers, again, for the sake of protecting the family. The FE, and I thought that was once again just a beautiful portrayal of everything. So thanks y'all for watching this video. I understand that it was kind of a longer one, and I hope that it made sense, because even as I was like trying to like create the video and everything, I was thinking of the most cohesive but yet elaborate way to be able to explain everything that I wanted to explain, and to allow it to be helpful to you guys while also still fun. And I'm planning to do this with a few more videos as well, depending on how this one goes, and how, just how well the editing and how well, it's received, all of that, if it's like helpful to you guys. So yeah, definitely let me know. Definitely drop your comments. Check out the movies if you haven't already. And let me know what y'all think about everything that I said. Let me know if you have any other insights, about even any of the other characters, in my opinion, and the type dynamics there. But yeah, I think that one of the biggest things, again, from this video to take away if you're an ENFJ or if you have an ENFJ in your life, is that ENFJs can be highly misunderstood a lot of times. They can be seen, we can be seen as controlling. We can be seen as manipulative. We can be seen as gaslighting. We can be seen as, I guess just a lot of those three, and different variances of that. But what I can say is that most of the time, we are actually planning, we are trying our best to just do what we think is best for everyone, and a lot of times we're not even considering what's best for ourselves, and that's a whole other story, that's a whole other video. But have patience with us and help us to be able to see where we're probably like going wrong, in a patient manner, because remember that FE is not just about doing what everybody wants us to do. It's not about getting people's wants met. It's about getting what people's needs met. And a lot of times, if we feel like you might need something that you want, then sure, that's great, that aligns. But if we feel like you want something that you don't need and would be harmful, then we are conflicted, but we try to keep that away from you. And then if we feel like you do not want something, but you need it, then again we're conflicted, but we feel like no, we have to give that to you, or else we're not a good friend. We're not doing our part in your life. But we have to understand, ENFJs, that you can't make those decisions for people. But continue to have hope in people. Continue to have faith in people. And again, if you are not an ENFJ, but you're watching this and you care about ENFJs, continue to have hope and faith in us too. Don't just go off on, comments and stuff like that and just talking about like how controlling and stupid and mean and evil and manipulative all the ENFJs are and stuff like that. That's not having hope in us. But continue to try to encourage us and have the best belief in our intentions and to help us to get on a better path, because a well-intentioned ENFJ is pretty much just only trying to do the same thing for you. And so, yeah, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate y'all. Again, it's one of my longer ones, but hit me up if y'all have any questions, comments, concerns. If you want coaching from me, check out the details in the description below. And